So hi, it has been a minute since I last recorded a history episode on this channel, and I'm sure you're all very aware of the complicated relationship I have with this page at the moment, but I was scrolling TikTok the other day and I heard about this story, and all at once I was inspired to write another history episode. This is fashion and feminism and suffragettes. Like, I was sold, I had to learn more, and I'm so glad I did, because it is truly shocking how little has changed in the last century. This is the story of the Hatpin panic. But first, I want to thank our sponsor today, Love and Pies. You know, sometimes I hate getting games to sponsor this channel because I download it just to check the game out to see if it's something I want to promote. And then bam, I'm sucked in and it's midnight and I'm on my phone merging little icons. I cannot stop playing Love and Pies. It's just a really nice way to switch off and relax. It's become this wonderful little escape for me. It's the perfect way to unwind after a long day working, making videos for you guys. And I've been using the game as a little treat, like a motivation to get my work done. Like, if I reply to all these emails by 5 p.m, I can go and sit on the sofa and have some Love and Pies time. And you know what? It's been working. I actually knew as soon as I opened the game for the first time that this was a game for me because there's a little pride flag on the loading screen and it's such a tiny thing, but it fills my heart with joy. It just immediately felt like a safe space for me, and that has continued as I progressed in the game. It feels so inclusive and lovely. So the game goes like this. Your mum's cafe has burned down under very mysterious circumstances. She's gone missing, and it's up to you to rebuild the cafe from the ruins and discover the secrets behind the fire, whilst also trying to turn the cafe into a successful business. You advance in the story by merging, so you basically match ingredients to create pies or cakes or fun little drinks that you can serve to your customers in exchange for coins that you then use to decorate your cafe. This is my cafe. She's very cute, she's very pretty. This is Tipsy, my dog. I love Tipsy so much. I would die for Tipsy. I'm way too invested in this, I'm not gonna lie to you. I love it. The whole game is just very aesthetic in terms of building a pretty cafe, but also just in terms of the graphics of this game. It is so high quality and the animations are second to none. I am genuinely so invested in this story. Like, I have to find out what happened to Amelia's mum. I have to find out if her and Joe, her high school sweetheart, get back together. Like, so much love and thought has gone into this game and I'm enjoying every second. So if you're looking for an easy, relaxing, inclusive game to play, Love and Pies is free to download right now using my link that you'll find in the description box down below or the QR code that is on screen right now. And if you use my link and reach day 3 within the next week, which is very easy to do, you can claim a sweet little treat that's 200 energy and 50 gems. So why not? It's free. It is literally free to download. And it's so fun. And with that, let's get back to talking about the Hatpin panic. Are you intrigued? That name is so intriguing. Hatpin panic. We're going to find out. So, the late 19th/early 20th century marked a historical turn for women across the Western world. The turn of the century came with women for the very first time beginning to actively assert their independence, actively challenge traditional roles, and seek greater autonomy. There was a feminist ideal that came out around this time called the New Woman, which is basically somebody who pushed the limits of a male-dominated society. The term was popularised by British-American writer Henry James, who used the term to describe the seemingly sudden boom in the amount of feminist, educated, independent career women in the United States and Europe. And this newfound independence came in many different forms. Women were seeking the ability to take part in physical activity. They wanted to do crazy things like cycling. I mean, in this time, bikes were a real craze. It was a very affordable, easy mode of transport, and this led to women gaining a greater amount of social mobility. They could literally leave the houses on their own and get somewhere quickly, alone. That had never happened before. I mean, it seems like something so simple, doesn't it? Like, the bike is something that so many of us would take for granted, but the bicycle changed a lot. Women had mobility. In the aftermath of industrialisation, for the first time, jobs and proper education outside the home were becoming available to young women, especially in the cities. There were suddenly these huge amounts of jobs going, especially in factories, and women, well, they were the ones to fill those roles. And this meant for the first time women were experiencing independence away from the men in their lives. I mean, women even had new legal rights to property around this time. Like, this was all a brand new era of freedom. Of course, they still didn't have the vote, and the new women ideal was pretty much reserved for the upper classes of society, the more privileged people. But women were still having rights they'd never really had before, and there was this huge push towards getting even more rights, and things really seemed to be moving in that direction. Freedom for women was definitely on the horizon. But of course, women can't just have a good thing. For decades, centuries even at this point, there had been a very established dating ritual in society. In the 1800s, dating, or courtship as it was known then, was a very formal process. It was very highly structured, the parents were involved, most of it happened inside the home, and there was a very strict etiquette. Formal introductions between men and women were typically arranged by family members, and couples or potential couples would only be allowed to meet with chaperones present. And engagements would happen within weeks or months of meeting, and the weddings would happen shortly after that, and only at that point, once they were married, would a couple be allowed to interact on their own. But now it's the late 1800s, and women for the very first time had reason to leave their homes independently, meaning that men had chances to interact with women for the very first time, away from the watchful eyes of chaperones and the stifling dating rules that had always held power. According to the Smithsonian magazine, social worker in this time Jane Addams said, "Never before in civilization have such numbers of young girls been suddenly released from the protection of the home and permitted to walk unattended upon city streets and to work under alien roofs." And of course, a lot of men didn't quite know how to deal with this newfound freedom to speak to or interact with women, and so came the rise of mashers. Masher became the name for predatory men who chose to target women out in public, men who stared at, catcalled, or even groped women out in public. The term masher might not be used anymore to describe such men, but I'm sure all women know that this sadly isn't a thing of the past. Men still do this. Some sources described mashers as men who purposefully dressed smarter, who pretended to have perfect manners in order to draw a woman in, and then they'd take advantage of having her attention. And of course, the women were the ones blamed for such behaviour. The Chicago Vice Commission recommended that unchaperoned women should dress as modestly as possible. Make sure those ankles are definitely not on show. Don't wear too much makeup. Men can't be expected to control themselves at the scandalous sight of an ankle. And this double standard, where women are blamed for provoking the harassment that they endure, is something we do still see today. The word masher may have faded from the lexicon, but the behaviour that he embodied still persists. A patriarchal society policing women's freedom whilst excusing male entitlement. Instead of holding men accountable, the burden is placed on women to anticipate and prevent male aggression through their dress and their behaviour. Sound familiar? Yeah. 100 years ago it was deemed that ankles were scandalous. It seems ridiculous by today's standards, but that was used as an excuse. Ankles were too enticing. And today it's too much leg, a too low top. The same ridiculous eye rolls can be applied to those things. The perceived lack of modesty is just an excuse from a patriarchal society, because the reality is a woman is going to be attacked because a man wants to attack her, not because of a flash of ankle or a flash of cleavage. She is going to be attacked if a man wants to do it. Essentially, there came to be a bit of a situation in the late 19th/early 20th century where women had to learn to protect themselves. They had to learn self-defense. But shockingly, there weren't many chances for women to learn self-defense in this time. There weren't many ways for women to get their hands on weapons, even legal ones. So they had to figure it out for themselves. And this is where we get to talk about fashion history for a bit, my favourite. One thing you probably need to know about me is that I am a hat girl. I love hats. They suit me, I like wearing them. I feel like any outfit can be made better with the right hat or just some sort of head accessory. Hats, in my opinion, are very cool. But you would be shocked at how many people like to make their opinions known about my hats. People comment on my hats all the time. It's very unusual for somebody to be a hat person. But that's a very new thing. Go back even just 40, 50 years, and hats were the norm, as they have been throughout large swathes of history. hats or head coverings of some description have always been a very important part of an outfit, often used to indicate social class or status. Think top hats being worn by the upper class whilst bowler hats are worn by the middle class. Hats have also always been very practical as well. They protect the face from the sun during the summer in a time before sun cream and keep the head warm in the winter. Hats have always been a very vital part of any outfit. And as with the rest of outfits, hats did change with the fashions. Around the 1870s, women went from wearing very simple bonnets on their heads to proper hats, hats which became more and more intricate over the next several decades. It was always expected to wear a hat when you're outdoors in this time in the late 19th century. It was considered very proper etiquette to do so. When men went indoors into public spaces, it was very expected for them to take their hats off, but women, however, had no such expectations, probably because hats were an absolute nightmare for women to take on and off. Men had hats fitted to their heads. It was very easy just to whip them on and off. They were very secure. It was very easy. Women's hats, however, didn't have such security. Their hats were designed to fit their hair, not their heads. It was fashion for a woman to have very long hair during this time, and I'm talking long hair. However, they couldn't be seen out with their long fashionable hair down. Of course not. Instead, women's hair would have to be fashioned into very intricate updos, the specific styles of which would change over the decades, but essentially the style was the bigger the better, the puffier the hairstyle, the cooler you were. And hats had to sit on top of these hairstyles, not directly on top of the head, meaning that taking your hat off would ruin the hairstyle that you probably spent hours on that morning. So yeah, men would take their hats off and women would keep their hats on, and these hats would be attached to the hair using hat pins. A hat pin is quite self-explanatory. It's a long metal pin used to hold a hat to a woman's head by the hair. The pins were often decorative, they became a fashion statement in themselves, and you simply couldn't really wear a hat without one. The ends would be adorned with gemstones or blown glass or something else pretty, and the pins would pass through the hat, through the hair, and secure it to the head. And for a long time, they were just that. But then men started being creepy, and all of a sudden, women were walking the streets with what would turn out to be a very effective weapon in their hair. An amazing source for this video was the book The Hatpin Menace, American Women Armed and Fashionable by Kerry Segrave, in which there are multiple accounts of women using hat pins to their benefit as self-protection. In April 1902, Mamie Andrews of East St. Louis was walking home from work at a department store when a strange man decided to join her, insisting on walking beside her. He tried to talk to her, tried to touch her, but she just ignored him, speeding up, hoping that he would give up. But he didn't, he matched her pace. Not knowing what else to do, Mamie grabbed a hat pin off her head and jabbed the man on the shoulder with it, and he ran off down the road. In May 1903, Kansas native Leotie Blaker was on a visit to New York City when an elderly masher decided to pursue her. She had got on a coach on Fifth Avenue, she sat down next to this elderly man, and she realised quite quickly that that was a mistake when he started making uncomfortable comments, embarrassing her in front of the other travellers. She kept edging away in her seat, but he would just get closer and closer. Yet another action that I'm sure women all around can relate to. Being on a bus or a train trapped by a creepy man. Apparently ignoring the fact that Leotie was clearly uncomfortable, the man then decided to put his arm around the back of her, and Leotie would later explain to a reporter, "I became so enraged that I didn't know what to do. At last I reached up and took a hat pin from my hat. I slid it around so I could give him a good dig and ran that hat pin into him with all the force I possessed." She said the man screamed when he was stabbed, and it did have the desired effect. He shut up and got off promptly at the next stop. Leotie, the icon that she was, also told the reporter that the hat pin was the best kind of defence a girl could have, and she would recommend it to all girls who were annoyed by the attentions of evil-minded men. And this, it turns out, wasn't the first time that Leotie had used the hat pin. She explained that once a tramp had tried to grab her pocketbook while she was walking through the woods. At that exact moment, she had a hat and pins in her hands already, so she just grabbed a pin and jabbed him in the face so hard that he ran away screaming. She said she planned to carry an extra hat pin in her shirt for the rest of her time in New York City. In September 1903, Lulu Rayner was arraigned in Washington, D.C. on a charge of assault and battery upon a man called George Dent. She pled guilty, saying that yes, she had struck him on the arm with a hat pin when he tried to hug her. The judge let her go, saying that a woman had every right to stick a man for taking such liberties. 17-year-old Gladys Green was returning home in Salt Lake City, Utah, when she was grabbed by a highwayman who tried to rob her, trying to rip her watch off her wrist. She swiftly drew her hat pin and stabbed him in the ribs, and she would later say that when she withdrew it, there was blood on 2 whole inches of the pin. The highwayman quickly fled the scene and Gladys kept her watch and police were called, but the man wasn't found. But he was at least injured. There are countless stories similar to these, women across the USA and the UK who were making the most of their hat pins, and men came to know that if they saw a woman pull out a pin, they needed to run. Hat pins gave women a modicum of safety. They were able to defend themselves not only against mashers on the street, but even against abusive husbands or family members. Am I condoning violence here? Of course not. That's a lie. I definitely am. Women deserve to protect themselves when society refuses to do so. But of course, that's not how the media and the wider world span this story. This was the late 1800s and the hysterical woman was somewhat of a trend at the time, with doctors claiming that at least a quarter of women suffered with hysteria. Female hysteria was a very common medical diagnosis in the 19th century. It was one of the most common, in fact. Hysteria is a term that originated in ancient Greece from the Greek word for womb, which was hystera, and the womb was said to wander around the female body, causing a wide array of physical and mental conditions. There were so many symptoms that lended to a hysteria diagnosis. There was anxiety, shortness of breath, fainting, nervousness, exaggerated sexual desire, insomnia, fluid retention, irritability, loss of appetite for food or sex. Too much sex is bad, not enough sex is bad. And also my favourite, a tendency to cause trouble for others. There was one 19th century doctor called George Beard who created a list of 75 pages of possible symptoms for hysteria, meaning that pretty much any ailment a woman could get could be attributed to hysteria, which is wildly problematic for so many reasons, but mostly it meant that women couldn't access proper medical help if they were ill. They would see a doctor for anything and be immediately slapped with hysteria. Women were simply hysterical, they weren't to be taken seriously. So I'm sure you can imagine the general male response to the hatpin attacks. It was just women being hysterical. Now, there were at the beginning some powerful voices that did express support for the use of hatpins to keep women safe. The New York Tribune published a story about how to use hatpins as defensive weapons, saying that at least they were better than guns. Many judges even expressed support, letting women go free for the attacks, refusing to send them to jail. However, male lawmakers were very eager to put an end to these attacks on these so-called hysterical women, and soon the media followed suit. They just followed the trend. There was no mind to stopping the mashers from doing the attacking, it was just stopping women from defending themselves. Never before had society been in a position where women could and did physically defend themselves, and they did not like it. And of course the symbolism here goes even deeper than that. The hatpin symbolised a woman's ability to defend herself, to assert her presence and power in public spaces. Never before had society been in a position where women had autonomy and their own voices, and society simply couldn't be having that. By the beginning of the 20th century, lawmakers across the US had started steps to outlaw hatpins. And I don't even think it was necessarily about the hatpins themselves. This was about the women's changing roles. It was about controlling, confining women once more because men didn't have the power. But the lawmakers couldn't say that, so they just banned the pins. And this wasn't just in the USA either, like the hatpin was a threat internationally. Police in Hamburg and Paris and London were also trying to take measures to regulate them. In March 1910, Chicago City Council debated an ordinance that would ban any hatpins longer than 9 inches. Women caught in violation of this would be arrested and fined $50, which is the equivalent over $1,500 today. Apparently the court was packed with people wanting to watch these proceedings, the women were furious and the men were in full support. One woman called Nan Davis, who was there representing several women's clubs, addressed the committee saying, "If the men of Chicago want to take the hatpins away from us, let them make the streets safe. No man has a right to tell me how I shall dress and what I shall wear." But her voice didn't matter. The ordinance passed by a vote of 68-2, and soon cities all around the world followed suit. Hatpins over 9 inches were banned. Luckily it was only over 9 inches though, because I can still imagine that a hatpin over 8 inches, 7 inches even, can still do a lot of harm. And I don't think all of this happened in a vacuum, because as you can probably imagine, the hatpin panic was very closely intertwined with the suffragette movement. The panic was unfolding as the suffragettes were gaining momentum. The suffragettes were fighting for women's rights. As women pushed for the right to vote and for greater political participation, they were increasingly viewed as a threat to the well-established social order, the patriarchy, and the hatpin came to be a perfect representation of this perceived threat. It was an everyday item loaded with this subversive power. Nothing about the bans was about men's safety, it was about control. As the hatpin panic grew in the media, the suffragettes were becoming increasingly visible. They were holding marches, protests, hunger strikes, just general civil disobedience. The image of the hysterical hatpin-wielding woman just fed into the media's and lawmakers' portrait of the unfeminine and dangerous new woman. The hatpin-wielding woman and the suffragettes weren't one and the same, but they were seen to be mirroring each other. They were both too bold, too assertive, too threatening to the status quo. The efforts to regulate the hatpins mirrored the kind of broader attempt to suppress the suffragette movement. And whilst lawmakers were able to ban long hatpins, this very tangible, very physical thing, they weren't able to ban what the hatpins represented, and that was resistance. On the back of these bans, women planned protests, the suffragettes attended, other liberal women attended, and all of these women came together to comprise first wave feminism, women fighting for formal equality for women, for the right to vote, for social and political power. This continued on through the 1910s, but then World War I happened and priorities shifted. Lawmakers stopped focusing on regulating women's clothing and instead turned their attention to the big war happening around the world. With something else to focus on, they stopped thinking about these little hatpins. And then fashion did its thing. In response to the changing world, fashions changed. The once very elaborate hats that required pins to stay in place shifted to more practical and streamlined designs. And what once was scandal and outrage at women leaving the homes and working now gave way to relief as women had to take the reins whilst men fought abroad. It was actually encouraged now for women to go out and work. This meant smaller hats, simpler, more functional, practical clothing. Whilst hatpins, the very physical fashion items, soon became a thing of the past, what it represented remained in the forefront of people's minds, especially when the new woman of the 1920s came about, which was the flapper. Flappers went against the very strongly gendered expectations of the time. They had their short hair, the short dresses, the undefined dropped waist, and just general independence. Of course, things weren't easy. Women didn't gain rights overnight, but they continued to fight for them. They continued to fight against the patriarchy's expectations of what a woman should be, subservient and obedient. That just wasn't going to fly any longer. In 1920, women gained the right to vote in the USA after the UK had done it 2 years earlier in 1918, and this was monumental for the feminist movement. However, of course, there was still a very long way to go. There still is a long way to go. A lot of what I've spoken about in this episode isn't shocking history, it's still the reality for so many. Women being told to cover up, being told that attacks are their fault for what they're wearing, what they're drinking, why were they alone, rather than the focus being on the men doing the attacking. Still today, women who take steps to defend themselves are the ones to face outright blame. You very much could argue that the modern day iterations of the hatpin are things like pepper spray, self-defense keychains, even mobile safety apps. But a lot of these things are legal grey areas or just downright illegal still in certain jurisdictions. When women refuse to be passive in the face of danger or injustice, their actions are quickly reframed as threats to the social order. When women speak out through movements like Me Too or other protests, they're labelled as overreacting, they're man-hating, or even still hysterical. The language used to discredit the suffragettes and the Hatpin women is still used today. Whether it is a hatpin or a hashtag online, women's resistance is still seen as a threat to the patriarchy, a threat to the systems that are built on relying on female compliance. And it is truly terrifying how little has changed in the last 150 years. Terrifying. I mean, here in the UK, things like pepper spray, self-defense keychains are very much illegal. People recommend carrying an aerosol like a hairspray that you can use to hurt somebody if you are attacked. But without getting into all these semantics of it, the UK law essentially says if you carry that with the intent of using it if you are attacked, then it becomes an illegal weapon. You can't protect yourself. You can carry a bottle of hairspray because you need to use hairspray, but if you carry it with the intent of using it if you're attacked, no, you can't. And if you do use it for that purpose, well, you're the one who's going to get in trouble. Of course, this is a legal grey area. Like, you can always argue that you're carrying a deodorant or a hairspray because you need to use it on your hair or on your armpits. But if a lawyer tries to twist that and tries to use it against you, you're probably not going to win. It is recommended here in the UK that the best self-defense item you can carry is a panic alarm. But how useful is a panic alarm if there's nobody around to hear it? And that is a very depressing place to end this episode. Feminism has come far, women's rights have come far, but there's still a very long way to go. We haven't even scratched the surface. If this episode's got you fired up and you want to support a woman, if you want to help a woman pay her bills, then please download Love and Pies from the top line of the description box down below or the QR code that's on screen right now. I love this game so much. Like, I honestly can't explain to you how much I love this game and how much I've been playing it. So please do go show your support and download it. You will not regret it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.